My name is Alara Sterling, though for the first 24 years of my life, I was Alara Vance. The change in surname was more than a legal formality. It felt like a shedding of one identity for another, like a snake leaving its skin behind in the hope of a newer, shinier existence. I know now that some skins are not meant to be shed, and that the name you are born with carries the weight and strength of generations. My father, General Arthur Vance, tried to teach me that through his quiet, unyielding presence, but it's a lesson I had to learn for myself, the hard way. I grew up in the transient world of military bases, a life of neatly packed boxes and the scent of pine cleaner in government-issued housing. My father was a man carved from discipline and duty, his love expressed not in effusive words, but in the crisp press of his uniform, the unwavering steadiness of his gaze, and the way he taught me to navigate by the stars. He taught me that strength was quiet, that resilience was a muscle to be exercised daily. My mother, who we lost to illness when I was a teenager, had been his perfect counterpoint, all warmth and art and laughter. From her, I inherited a love for stories, for healing, and a tendency to see the best in people, even when they gave me little reason to. It was this tendency that led me to Julian Sterling. And it was my father's quiet strength I had to rediscover to leave him. We lived, I should say, in Crestwood Bay, a city of sharp, modern architecture clinging to the cliffs above a perpetually moody sea. Our house was Julian's masterpiece, a minimalist cube of glass and steel cantilevered over the water. From the living room, you could see the entire sweep of the bay, from the distant, hazy islands to the glittering lights of the downtown core. It was breathtakingly beautiful and achingly cold, a perfect reflection of the life we had built inside it. I am a pediatric nurse. It is not a glamorous profession, not in the world Julian and his family inhabited, but it is my calling. There is a sacred trust in holding a frightened child's hand before surgery, a profound meaning in calming a parent's frantic heart. It is work that is real, tangible, and deeply human. In the sterile, fluorescent-lit halls of St. Jude's Children's Hospital, I was Nurse Alara, competent and respected. At home, in our glass fortress by the sea, I was simply Julian's wife, an accessory he polished for display and put away when she no longer suited the occasion. 3 years. 3 years of my life had been poured into this marriage, a slow, almost imperceptible erosion of self. It didn't happen all at once. It happened in 1,000 tiny moments, a dismissive wave of his hand when I spoke of my day, a cutting remark from his mother disguised as helpful advice, a condescending laugh from his sister at my choice of dress. Each one was a small paper cut, insignificant on its own, but together they had left me bleeding out my confidence, my joy, my very sense of who I was. Tonight was important. The word had been echoing through the house for weeks. Julian was being considered for a full partnership at Sterling and Finch Capital, the prestigious investment firm his father had co-founded. The final hurdle was a dinner party at our home for the senior partner, Mr. Albright, and his wife. Everything had to be perfect. And in the Sterling family, perfect was a standard I could never quite achieve. 6 hours earlier, the scent of roasting rosemary and garlic filled the kitchen, a warm, comforting aroma that felt out of place in the sleek, sterile space. I was basting a chicken, a simple, rustic dish I'd chosen for its comforting familiarity. It was a small act of rebellion. "Is that chicken?" Eleanor, my mother-in-law, appeared in the doorway, her impeccably coiffed silver hair unruffled, her silk blouse a shade of cream that probably had a name like Winter Moonbeam. She surveyed my preparations with the critical eye of a health inspector. "Alara, darling, I thought we discussed coq au vin. It's so much more sophisticated." "I thought a simple roast would be lovely and comforting, Eleanor. Less fussy." I forced a smile, my hands tightening on the baster. "Fussy is another word for effort, dear. And Mr. Albright is a man who appreciates effort." She drifted over to the dining room table, where I had spent an hour arranging the settings. I watched as she picked up a water goblet, holding it to the light. "And this glassware. Are these the ones you brought to the marriage?" "They're a bit pedestrian. The baccarat is in the upper cabinet." Before I could respond, Julian's sister, Chloe, sauntered in, scrolling through her phone. Mom's right, Alara. The Albrights are used to a certain standard. You don't want them to think Julian married down. She giggled, a light, tinkling sound that always managed to sound like breaking glass. I took a deep breath, the fragrant steam from the oven a temporary shield. I had learned to choose my battles, and the battle over glassware was not one I had the energy to fight. I merely nodded and said, "I'll change them." Julian found me in the dining room, carefully replacing my own sturdy, beloved glasses with the delicate, almost weightless baccarat crystals. He came up behind me, his hands landing on my shoulders. It was a gesture that, to an outsider, might have looked affectionate. But I felt the pressure of his fingers, the subtle tension in his grip. It wasn't a caress, it was a warning. "Everything going smoothly?" he asked, his voice a low murmur near my ear. He smelled of expensive cologne and ambition. "As smoothly as it can," I said, my voice tight. "You know how much tonight means, Ellie." He used his pet name for me, the one from our early days, and it felt like a weapon. "I need this to be flawless. No mistakes. No drama." His words were a cold weight in my stomach. I turned to face him, searching his handsome face for a flicker of the man I thought I had married. All I found was a reflection of the bay outside, vast, glittering, and cold. "When have I ever caused drama, Julian?" He gave me a smile that didn't reach his eyes. It was his boardroom smile, all polished teeth and veiled threats. "Let's just keep it that way. I need you to be charming, quiet, and supportive. My lovely, unassuming wife. Can you do that for me?" Unassuming. The word hung in the air, another small cut. I nodded, because it was easier than arguing, because I had forgotten how to do anything else. I was an actress in my own life, and tonight I had been given my role. The loving, supportive, and utterly invisible wife. I just prayed I wouldn't forget my lines. We had met at a charity gala. I was there with a group of nurses from the hospital. He was there because his family's name was on the invitation. I was in a simple black dress, feeling a little out of place amongst the sequins and champagne. He'd approached me with a smile that felt like sunshine. "You look like the only real person in this room," he'd said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. He was different from anyone I'd ever met. Confident but not arrogant, witty but not cruel. He listened, truly listened, when I talked about my work. He called pediatric nursing a form of heroism. For the first time, I felt seen by someone outside the walls of the hospital. Our courtship was a whirlwind of breathtaking gestures. He sent 1,000 white tulips to the nurse's station after our first date. He rented a small boat, and we sailed across the bay at sunset, a blanket and a bottle of wine between us. He spoke of a future filled with partnership and mutual respect. "I don't want a wife who stands behind me," he told me, his hand covering mine. "I want one who stands beside me." My father, ever the pragmatist, had been cautiously optimistic. We'd met for lunch at a quiet diner, a world away from Julian's polished life. "He seems driven, Alara," Dad had said, stirring his coffee. "That's a good quality. But a man's character isn't defined by his ambition. It's defined by how he treats people when he thinks no one is looking." I had laughed, brushing off his concern. "Oh, Dad. He's wonderful. He treats me like a queen." And in the beginning, he did. The first 6 months of our marriage felt like an extension of that golden haze. We moved into the house on the cliff, a place so beautiful it felt like living in a dream. But slowly, the dream began to curdle at the edges. The first crack appeared over a set of shelves. I had wanted to put up some simple wooden shelves in the study to hold my nursing textbooks and my mother's collection of poetry. "Absolutely not," Julian had said, not even looking up from his laptop. "They'll ruin the clean lines of the room. It's all been professionally designed, Ellie." "But it's my study, too," I'd said, my voice small. "I'd like to have a little piece of me in it." He'd finally looked up, his expression one of mild irritation. "The whole house is for you. My success provides all of this for us. Can't you just appreciate that?" I backed down. It was just shelves, after all. Then came the slow, insidious campaign by Eleanor and Chloe. It began with helpful suggestions about my wardrobe, my cooking, my choice of friends. "Those nurses you work with are sweet, I'm sure," Eleanor had commented after a barbecue I'd hosted. "But they're not quite our circle, are they?" The most painful blow came about a year into the marriage. It was about my great-grandmother's quilt. It was a beautiful, chaotic thing, a patchwork of mismatched fabrics from 100 different sources, each stitch a testament to a life lived through hardship and joy. It was the one piece of my history, my family, that I had brought into that house. I kept it folded at the foot of our bed. I came home from a long shift to find our bedroom completely redecorated. The warm, human mess of our life had been replaced by a sterile landscape of gray and beige. The quilt was gone. My heart hammering, I found Eleanor downstairs, sipping tea. "Isn't it marvelous?" she'd beamed. "I hired the best interior designer in Crestwood Bay. It's so much more fitting for a man of Julian's stature. I had the maid dispose of that old blanket you had. It was so faded and dreary." Dispose of. The words felt like a physical blow. When Julian came home, I was sobbing, clutching the empty space where the quilt used to be. He didn't understand. "Ellie, calm down. It's just a blanket," he'd said, his voice laced with exasperation. "My mother spent a fortune making this place beautiful for us. You should be thanking her." I should have called my father then. I should have packed a bag and walked out. But I didn't. I told myself I was overreacting. I told myself marriage was about compromise. I told myself that love meant forgiving the people who hurt you. I mistook my own endurance for strength, my silence for patience. The dinner was, against all odds, going well. Mr. Albright was a portly man with a kind, rumpled face and a booming laugh. His wife, Evelyn, was a sharp, elegant woman with intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She turned to me during the main course, her expression one of genuine curiosity. "Julian tells me you're a pediatric nurse, Alara," she said. "That must be incredibly challenging, but so rewarding." I felt a warmth spread through my chest, the unfamiliar sensation of being addressed as an individual with a life of my own. "It is," I said, a real smile touching my lips for the first time all evening. "The children are amazing. They have this incredible resilience. Just last week, I had this one little girl, Lily, who was terrified of her heart surgery." Alara tends to get a bit sentimental about her work, Julian interrupted smoothly, with a small, indulgent laugh. "It's mostly just taking temperatures and changing bedpans, isn't it, darling?" The warmth in my chest vanished, replaced by a familiar icy dread. The air left my lungs. Changing bedpans. He had reduced my entire career, my passion, my identity, to a demeaning caricature in 2 sentences. The table fell silent. I could feel Mr. Albright's discomfort and Chloe's barely suppressed smirk. But Evelyn Albright just raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow at Julian. "Actually," she said, her voice cool and precise, "I was on the board of St. Jude's for 5 years. I'm well aware that pediatric cardiac nursing is one of the most technically demanding and emotionally taxing specialties in the field. It requires a level of skill and compassion that, frankly, most people don't possess." She then turned her gaze back to me, warm and encouraging. "Please, Alara, tell us about Lily." It was as if she had handed me a lifeline. I looked at her, and then at her husband, who was nodding in agreement. And in that moment, something shifted in me. A tiny, dormant spark of the woman I used to be flickered to life. I took a breath and continued my story. Lily was convinced the scar would make her ugly. So, I told her it was a zipper, and that's where the doctors put in all her extra courage and strength. When she woke up, the first thing she did was touch her chest and whisper, "I'm full of courage now." A tear welled in Evelyn's eye. "That's an extraordinary thing to do," she said softly. "That's not just nursing," Mr. Albright added, his voice full of respect. He looked at Julian, then back at me. "That's leadership. The ability to reframe a negative into a positive, to connect with someone on a deeply human level, that's a rare talent, young lady. In any field." For a moment, I felt 10 feet tall. I felt the pride and purpose of my work wash over me, cleansing the shame and smallness that had clung to me for years. I was not invisible. I was a damn good nurse. But then I saw Julian's face. His smile was a tight, brittle line. His knuckles were white where he gripped his wine glass. The praise directed at me felt like a personal affront to him. The spark of defiance in my chest was met with the cold certainty that I would pay for this moment. The rest of the dinner was a tightrope walk over a chasm of his barely concealed fury. The moment the Albrights' taillights disappeared down our long, winding driveway, the fragile peace shattered. Julian rounded on me, his face a mask of cold rage. What the hell was that? His voice was dangerously quiet, a tone I had come to fear more than his shouting. What was what? I asked, my own voice shaking slightly as I began clearing the plates. Don't play dumb with me, Alara. He followed me into the kitchen, blocking my path. That little performance at the dinner table. I'm full of courage now. Are you kidding me? You completely monopolized the conversation. You made yourself the center of attention. Evelyn asked me a question, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I was just answering her. She was being polite, he hissed, his voice rising. And you used it as a stage to make me look like some kind of idiot who can't control his own wife. Albright was praising you. My boss was praising my wife's stories about bedpans and zippers while I'm trying to close the most important deal of my life. From the living room, where Eleanor and Chloe were sipping brandy, Eleanor's voice floated out, sharp and smug. I told you she wasn't ready for this, Julian. The girl has no sense of occasion. See? Julian gestured wildly toward the living room. Even my mother sees it. Something inside me, that tiny spark from dinner, ignited into a flame. I set the plates down on the counter with a clatter that made him flinch. Sees what, Julian? That for 5 minutes, the conversation wasn't about you? That for 5 minutes, someone in this house treated me like I had something of value to say. Your value, he snarled, stepping closer, is in supporting me. In making me look good. Tonight, you did the opposite. You embarrassed me. I stared at him, at this stranger whose face I had once loved, and the last of my fear burned away, leaving behind a cold, hard clarity. No, Julian. I didn't embarrass you. I was impressive. I was articulate. I was myself. And that's what you can't stand. The words hung between us. It was the truest thing I had said in our house in 3 years. Don't you dare, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. I dare, I said, my voice rising to meet his. I walked past him into the living room to face my 2 other tormentors. Let's all talk about this. I want to understand. What exactly was my crime tonight? Was it having a career? Was it being good at it? Or was it simply failing to be invisible? Eleanor looked at me with pure disdain. Your crime, you foolish girl, was forgetting your place. Tonight was for Julian. Your role was to be a silent, smiling asset. And you failed. My place? I laughed, a raw, bitter sound. My place is not to be an asset. I am a person. A person you have all spent 3 years trying to dismantle, piece by piece. You criticized my clothes, my friends, my family. You threw away the last thing I had of my great-grandmother and told me I should be grateful. I turned my gaze back to Julian. And you. You stood by and watched it all happen. You participated. You belittled my work tonight in front of people who actually understood its worth. You have never, not once, stood up for me. I have given you everything, he roared, his composure finally snapping. This house. This life. And this is the thanks I get? You ungrateful. I would trade this house and this life in a second. I shot back, my voice ringing with a strength I didn't know I possessed, to be with a man who respected me. A man who would be proud of his wife, not ashamed of her. His face contorted with fury. He raised his hand. For a split second, the world slowed down. I saw the rage in his eyes, the contempt on his mother's face, the morbid curiosity on his sister's. And I knew this was the end. I didn't flinch. I just looked him straight in the eye. The slap echoed through the living room like a gunshot. My cheek burned, the sting spreading across my face as tears I'd learned to swallow threatened to spill. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the cruel laughter bubbling up from the couch. About time someone put her in her place, Eleanor sneered, her voice dripping with satisfaction. My mother-in-law's eyes sparkled with malice as she adjusted her designer glasses, watching me with the same expression she'd wear watching a bug being squashed. The girl never learns. My sister-in-law, Chloe, giggled behind her manicured hand. She had it coming, honestly, walking around here like she owns the place. I stood frozen, My hand pressed against my burning cheek, tasting blood where my teeth had cut the inside of my mouth. The humiliation was worse than the pain. 3 years of this. 3 years of being their punching bag, their entertainment, their outlet for every cruel impulse. Julian flexed his fingers as if shaking off the impact. His face showed no remorse, only the satisfied look of a man who just reminded everyone who is in charge. Maybe now you'll think twice before embarrassing me in front of my colleagues, he said, straightening his tie with casual indifference. None of them heard the front door open. None of them noticed the measured footsteps crossing the marble entryway, but I did. They were the footsteps that had paced the halls of my childhood, the sound of safety, of order, of absolute authority. I turned toward the living room entrance just as my father stepped into view, flanked by 2 men in immaculate military dress uniforms. General Arthur Vance stood in the doorway, his steel-gray eyes taking in the scene with the calculating precision of a man who'd spent 30 years reading battlefields. The room fell silent. The change was instant and absolute. Julian's satisfied smirk froze on his face. Eleanor's laughter died in her throat. Chloe stopped mid-giggle, her eyes widening. Dad's gaze moved slowly from my tear-streaked face to my reddening cheek, then to Julian's still-flexed hand. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air, something that made even the house itself seem to hold its breath. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, controlled, and more terrifying than any shout could ever be. "Gentlemen," he said to his companions, never taking his eyes off Julian. "I believe we have confirmation of the hostile action." The silence in the room was a living thing, thick and suffocating. Julian, who could command boardrooms with a single glance, looked like a schoolboy caught in a lie. Eleanor, a woman who wielded social power like a weapon, seemed to shrink into her armchair. "General Vance," Julian stammered, taking a half-step back. This is a surprise. I don't understand. Don't you, son?" My father's voice was still quiet, almost conversational, but it held the cold weight of command. He took a slow step into the room, his eyes never leaving Julian's face. "Let me clarify. I am here because my daughter has been living in a hostile environment. And tonight, that environment became physically violent. I am here to extract her." He turned his gaze to me, and for the first time, his expression softened. The general disappeared, and he was just my dad. "Alara, are you all right?" I could only nod, my hand still pressed to my stinging cheek. The sight of him, solid and real in this house of illusions, broke the dam of my control. A single, hot tear traced a path down my other cheek. "This is a private family matter." Eleanor found her voice a shrill, indignant squeak. "You have no right to barge in here with your soldiers." My father didn't even glance at her. He reached into the inner pocket of his uniform jacket and pulled out a thick manila folder. He tossed it onto the glass coffee table, where it landed with a heavy, final thud. "On the contrary, Mrs. Sterling," he said calmly. "This stopped being a private matter the first time your son laid his hands on my daughter. Or perhaps it was when you began a systematic campaign of psychological abuse against her. It's all in the report. Very thorough." Julian's face went white as he stared at the folder. "Report? What are you talking about? Did you really think I wouldn't notice?" My father's voice was laced with a deep, sorrowful disappointment. "Did you think I wouldn't see my own daughter fading away? The daughter who used to call me every Sunday, who suddenly had excuses for every missed visit. The strained voice, the shadows under her eyes? I am trained to recognize a siege, Julian. And my daughter has been under siege in this house for 3 years." He gestured to the folder. "I hired a private investigator 6 months ago. A retired intelligence officer. Meticulous man. He has documented everything. The financial control, the verbal abuse, the isolation. He even managed to recover the security footage from the day you disposed of my wife's mother's quilt." His eyes finally flicked to Eleanor, and they were as cold and hard as granite. "A family heirloom. You threw it in the trash." Eleanor paled, clutching her throat. "This is insane. You can't prove anything." Julian blustered, but the panic in his eyes betrayed him. "Oh, I can," my father said, his voice turning crisp and professional. The full report, including a sworn affidavit from your former maid and photographs of Alara's bruises from last winter, was delivered to the Ethics Committee at Sterling and Finch this afternoon. I also took the liberty of having a private conversation with Mr. Albright an hour ago. He was deeply disturbed. It seems a firm that manages other people's fortunes puts a high premium on the personal integrity of its partners. The color drained completely from Julian's face. He sank onto the edge of the sofa as if his legs could no longer support him. His career, his ambition, his entire identity, all of it was dissolving before his eyes. But that's not all, my father continued, his gaze sweeping over the room. Chloe, your fiancé's family, the Winthrops? Very old money, very concerned with appearances. I believe they'll be receiving a summary of your complicity in this matter tomorrow morning. And Eleanor, your position as head of the Crestwood Bay Charity Foundation is contingent on a morals clause. It turns out that enabling abuse is considered a significant moral failing. It wasn't vengeance. I saw that clearly. It was strategy. My father had assessed the battlefield, identified every point of leverage, and dismantled their lives with the same dispassionate precision he would use to plan a military campaign. He hadn't come to fight a war. He had come to announce its conclusion. He turned back to me, his hand outstretched. Alara, it's time to go home. Go upstairs and pack a bag. Only what is yours. What truly matters. His eyes held mine. The quilt is in my car. I had my man retrieve it from the municipal dump a year ago. It's been cleaned and repaired. It's waiting for you. Tears streamed down my face now, but they were tears of relief, of a profound, shattering release. He had known. All this time, he had known and been watching over me, waiting for me to be ready. I looked at Julian, a broken man on a beige sofa. I looked at Eleanor, her face a mask of horrified disbelief. I looked at Chloe, staring at her phone as if expecting it to melt. And I felt nothing. No anger, no hatred. Just a vast, empty pity for these small, cruel people whose power had been built on such a fragile foundation. Actually, Dad, I said, my voice clear and steady. There's something I need to do first. I walked over to the coffee table and pulled off my wedding ring. The 3-carat diamond, once a symbol of a brilliant future, now felt like a shackle. I set it down gently on top of the manila folder. I looked directly at Julian. I once thought that loving you was the greatest adventure of my life, I said softly. But I realize now my greatest adventure will be learning to love myself again. Without you. I didn't wait for a reply. I turned and walked up the stairs, my father's quiet soldiers standing at attention at the bottom, silent guardians of my new freedom. Each step I took felt lighter than the last, as if I were shedding a great, invisible weight. I was no longer Alara Sterling. I was Alara Vance, and I was finally going home. 1 year later. The light in my new apartment was soft and golden. It streamed through the large windows of the converted loft, illuminating the specks of dust dancing in the air and warming the worn wood of the floorboards. It was a small space, nothing like the glass palace on the cliff, but every inch of it was mine. My mother's paintings hung on the brick walls, my nursing textbooks were neatly arranged on simple pine shelves, and on my bed, a riot of color and memory, lay my great-grandmother's quilt. I was promoted to pediatric nursing supervisor 6 months ago. The role suited me. I was good at it, not just the administrative tasks, but the advocacy. I started a new program at St. Jude's, a support system for the families of chronically ill children, focusing not just on their medical needs, but their emotional and psychological well-being. It was the kind of work that filled my soul. I rarely thought of the Sterlings. The divorce had been swift and quiet. Julian had lost his partnership and, from what I heard, had moved to a smaller firm in a different state, his reputation in Crestwood Bay in tatters. Eleanor had resigned from all her charity boards and retreated from public life. Chloe's engagement had been broken off. Their world, built on image and intimidation, had crumbled without me to serve as its foundation. I had received one letter about a month after I left. It was from Chloe. It was a rambling, tear-stained apology, full of words like enabling and therapy. She didn't ask for forgiveness, only to say that my leaving had forced her to look at her family and herself in a way she never had before. I read it, acknowledged the flicker of humanity in it, and then I threw it away. Her healing was her journey, not mine. This afternoon, I was speaking at a local university's nursing school graduation. It was an honor I never would have dreamed of 2 years ago. My father was in the front row, his back ramrod straight, a small, proud smile on his face. He had retired last spring and now spent his days volunteering, organizing logistics for a veteran support network. He had found a new, quieter battlefield. I stood at the podium, looking out at the sea of bright, hopeful faces. I thought about what I could possibly say to them that would matter. They will teach you about pharmacology and anatomy, I began, my voice steady. They will teach you protocols and procedures. But they may not teach you the most important lesson, how to protect your own heart in a profession that will ask for all of it. I told them about the importance of boundaries, not just with patients, but in life. I talked about the difference between compassion and self-sacrifice, between strength and silent endurance. Your greatest tool, I concluded, looking from face to face, is not a stethoscope or a syringe. It is your own voice. Do not ever let anyone convince you to silence it. Your voice has the power to advocate, to comfort, to challenge, and to heal. Use it for your patients, but also, please, use it for yourselves. You are worthy of the same care you give so freely to others. As the applause swelled, I caught my father's eye. He gave me a slow, deliberate nod, the highest form of praise in his vocabulary. Later, as we walked through the campus gardens, he handed me a small, clumsily wrapped gift. Inside was a simple silver compass on a delicate chain. "So you never lose your way again," he said, his voice thick with emotion. I clipped it around my neck, the cool metal a comforting weight against my skin. "I won't, Dad," I said, my own eyes welling up. "I know which way is north now." My life was not a fairy tale. There was no new prince, no dramatic romance to erase the scars of the past. My story was quieter and far more profound. It was the story of a woman who had journeyed into darkness and found her way back, not by finding a new light in someone else, but by learning to ignite her own. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the grass, I felt a deep, abiding peace. The past was a part of my story, a chapter of darkness that gave the current chapter of light its meaning. I was Alara Vance, a nurse, a leader, a daughter, a survivor. I was whole, not because someone else had completed me, but because I had painstakingly, courageously, put my own pieces back together. And I was finally, truly free.